Welcome to the Juice Consumer Direct Podcast. I'm Nate Clegg, and I'm here with Carson Poppenger and our special guest and friend, Joey Liner. So, Joey, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
For sure.
Hey, Joey, it's great having you here. 2 decades of experience in performance marketing, consumer direct, working with a lot of different industry leaders and all the consulting that you're doing today and now work helping people place and find positions to fill and recruiting that you're doing. I think it's great to have you here because you've got everyone knows Joey, everyone loves Joey, and it's great to have you here with us.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm excited for you guys to grow your podcast. It's been fun to watch you guys build it out, and I have a lot of love and respect for both of you guys and the team at Squeeze, and just it's great to it's a good time to be alive through performance marketing, right? I mean, it's what we've all kind of been through and bonded specifically the last year. It's great to be here with you on the other side of the one-to-one consent rolling this past week. So it's good to be here with you.
Yeah, it's been a fun time. Everybody's kind of celebrating. There's new wind in everybody's sails. We've even seen on our side, we weren't going to be majorly impacted by one-to-one at our company. A lot of our clients have their own basically portfolio that we're calling through, or they already have dedicated branded leads. So one-to-one was going to affect them too much, but it was going to affect us some. But even the ones that it shouldn't have affected, there's optimism there too. Budgets across the board have kind of increased over the last just few days, all because the one-to-one consent changes. So it's been a big deal that it got pushed back at least a year, and who knows how long. And so I agree. Yeah. It's been interesting to see the enthusiasm.
It's a trickle down effect, right? So ultimately, we know that we had to make plans for our clients that were generating their own leads. When I talked to a lot of brands, they had two paths. They had, hey, I have to be prepared to buy direct traffic or clicks, or if I am generating or working for lead generators where there's a checkbox, right? And it's specific where I know it's my name being presented. But hey, if there's a rollback in this lead, if this does get overturned, I can go back and buy leads from, how I'm buying them today. And so, like you said, you guys were already planned to be able to work through this already. But ultimately, as it stood, you needed to make sure that you were able to, be prepared for both scenarios. And it sounds like some of your clients are already showing you that they're ready to grow with more budgets, more volume in some of these verticals that we know can provide more volume with the lead generators.
Yeah, I think it's for sure going to be the case that leads are going to be more abundant and leads are going to cost less. I mean, those two things are kind of tied together. And I think people see that, and there's going to be enthusiasm because, like you said, even if they're still going to drive clicks or traffic to dedicated forms, well, the front of the funnel sort of lead generator is going to be able to do that and charge less for it because they've got resource and other monetization coming on off the back end. So it's going to make it easier. I do have a question about it. I'm curious, How many of the companies that either you consult with or what you've seen out there are still going to kind of push forward with some of the changes? Meaning, obviously, maybe they won't adopt all the changes, but they're still going to kind of push towards dedicated forms, branded forms, that sort of thing. And because there's been a lot of work put into this, do you see companies saying, hey, we're still going to do this? This is still the direction we're going to go?
It's a really good question, Nate, just because the hysteria from, the initial response of, hey, everything's cool, we're back to the way. But I actually think you bring up a great point that I think brands out of all this, the holy grail, which we all know, we want to work with direct brands. They learned so much through this process. They all actually learned how their brand was being positioned through a lot of these flows, right? That we call, whether it's a mortgage site or consumer credit card site or insurance, auto insurance, but they learned the transparency of how their brand was being positioned and placed. I think they knew about it previously, but they knew the matching process was kind of blind. And they learned this way, hey, if I go through the flow, it's either going to be like a select all button or the consumer will see my brand. So the national brands were like, okay, probably favors us because, they're going to know who we are. So I do think that they also had sympathy knowing that consumers weren't going to check off each box individually. So they knew that, hey, as much as this is like direct one-to-one matching, I'm going to get a lot less volume if I'm dependent on buying leads from lead generators if this goes into effect. So I do think that there's going to be some middle ground when we see like, oh, it's thrown out. I think the brands learned too much at this point where they're going to say, hey, if you present me, you don't have to do check boxes because I know that's new restrictive, but maybe I'm not going to allow the marketing partners link anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm not going to, you can't put 10,000 names on the marketing partners link because it is too confusing to the consumer. And I don't want to just be blended there. Or you don't have to do check boxes, but maybe you can list my brand by the submit button and just mention that they are, because you've already, like to your point, the lead generators have already invested so much technology into, they had to be ready for this rollout of this matching process. And which meant they, in real time, they can match the brand, right? Or they're passing through, if it's an affiliate, they're passing through who it's matched to. So I do think that we're going to see some sort of change.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they've now developed smart forms, and some of the things I've explained to people when we've talked about, well, why are there so many partners on that marketing partner list? Well, there's bad reasons why there's so many, but there's also some simplistic ones where it depends on the geography. It depends on, whether that's a duplicate lead that brand's already received. So in the end, it could land in all kinds of different places. That many marketing partners, though, is too many, and there's a reason why this ruling came out. And it was kind of short-sighted. It didn't understand the industry very well. And because of it, it was flawed. But it still came out for a reason. And it was consumers are not happy with how much they're dialed. They're not happy with the interaction that they're experiencing today. And especially if you're a brand and you've invested millions of dollars in your brand, like a Liberty Mutual, right? You got see Limu Emu everywhere. Well, it's not going to do you any good if all of a sudden you're going to get crushed in the dialing process and just get overwhelmed with marketing. So it seems inevitable to me that this has built some momentum, and the technology, like you said, the smart forms, where it can basically do that kind of algorithm on the back end saying, this is who should be presented. I think some of that still happens. Right. I hope it does.
Yeah, and we have to see how it plays out in the next couple of weeks, right? Just like we're living through this in real time because it got thrown out. And I don't know if you guys sat in on the Insurance Marketing Coalition webinar. There were so many webinars the last 24 hours.
A lot of them.
Here we are recording on Tuesday. There's been, 3 or so webinars already. And there's like 3 more planned this week with every attorney and every lead generator trying to get ahead of this, right? But I think it's really important to see, get feedback from your buyers, get an understanding of how they're reacting, how their legal departments are reacting, and just, know that thankfully this won't be part of TCPA. That was made clear during the Insurance Marketing Coalition webinar, is that based on the 11th Circuit has the authority to make it clear it can't be part of the TCPA moving forward. The only way it could is if it went to the Supreme Court, but that would mean the Supreme Court would have to take this up, which seems very unlikely.
Yeah.
It's possible, but it depends on if like the NCLC pushes this further. But they'd have to find another way to approach this, whether it's through the FTC or through marketing regulations and industry specific, which kind of it's already happened like with CMS and Medicare. But yeah, it's crazy how all this has unfolded. And yeah, I think communication is key. I've encouraged every one of my clients, like, pick up the phone and call your clients, like talk through this. Don't just assume things, talk through it, communicate.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think that, one of the big unintended consequences that would have been unfortunate if this did go through is, like you mentioned, brands. There's so many brands out there that just have that dominant name and they're buying up all the media and they're everywhere. And then you have like the, smaller startups that are trying to compete and they're trying to compete against the big ones. And it's like, Lending Today or something like that. And they go out there and they're placed next to Rocket or one of these other companies. And no one's ever heard of this other company. And so they're, is the consumer going to choose them over Rocket, or is
Probably not.
And then what happens when everyone chooses the big brands? Then there's less competition. And then at that point, if there's less competition, then what happens to pricing? Pricing isn't as much of a concern because we own the market. We can price at a higher rate and the consumer ends up paying more. So there were so many unintended consequences with this that for those reasons, I'm kind of glad that it was overturned.
Agreed.
But, last year in April, we were at LeadsCon, and I think this initially discussion came out like in mid-March, I think, of last year. I can't remember exactly. But then we went to LeadsCon, and I was asking one of the big lead generator partners that we work with, Matt Connolly. You know Matt, right?
Yep.
We were chatting, and I heard it from Matt first. I said, what do you think about the one-to-one ruling that's going to happen next year? He said, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. He was 100% confident. And then, I was all the way through, everyone's like, it's looking like it's going to happen. You should plan for it. It's going to happen. And I'm like, I don't know, new administration, everything's on the table to be evaluated. I'm just surprised it went to Friday at 3 p.m. Mountain, 5 p.m. Eastern, because we were all in the office. We were literally Friday. I just kind of tell a story. Friday, we were the entire day we were working with our legal counsel. We had one of our partners was concerned about it, and they wanted our position and legal defense around this decision, things like that, and what we were going to do on Monday. And for whatever reason, it went to the final hour. It wasn't particularly on our. Yeah,
they were delayed. Our other partners, we'd had communication with months ahead of time, but
yes.
And so we were working with our attorney all day back and forth, and we'd fired off the letter an hour before, and then we're just sitting there chatting about it, and then we see the update, and we were all like, what? It was kind of a crazy way to end the week last week with that news, but it was welcome.
Yeah.
So Joe, I got a question for you. Who out of all of these trade organizations and attorneys and things, because you've got Reach, you've got Pace, and you've got this insurance group who seem to have specifically won this case. Who wins out of all this? Who comes out of all this with the most credibility in your imagination? Or is it just whatever, everybody, no one cares?
Well, I actually think that it's a great, and I don't take this as a kind of answer as picking one. I think it's a combination, because I do think that not many people knew about the Insurance Marketing Coalition up until this popped up on the front burner, right? And they were leading the charge here. Reach, which I'm a part of, founded by Eric Troutman, one of the leading TCPA attorneys in the space. Reach actually is very in tune with, of course, the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, and its mission is actually to stop unwanted calls. Like Nate, to your point, you said it about a couple minutes ago. That was really why the rule was intended. And so we were actually understanding and supportive and had open dialogue with the FCC. But we wanted to actually take it further for our clients and just stop the carriers blocking the actual legitimate calls, right? That was the value that we were trying to say, is we actually want to prove that these consumers are raising hands and stop flagging them, stop blocking them. So there's a two-way dialogue there, right? And really we felt that there's standards that need to be put in place for lead generators. The challenge is that, as you can imagine, you guys know this working with a lot of the performance marketing lead generators, it's just hard for everybody to agree on commonality and standards. We produce standards, but it's also hard for everyone to say that they're willing to adapt those standards. That's just fact. It's been happening for 20 years. When I was part of Leads Council, we tried to produce standards. It's just too hard to get across the stack, publicly traded companies. Now, I do think Reach is going to continue to work with regulators, continue to at the state level, which is also going to be, there's going to be a lot more coming out too with states restrictions, especially blue states. And then also FTC there's a record keeping rule that's coming up. So I think that's now will become more people's attention now that we're over the 1-to-1. So I think the storage and record keeping rule now becomes something that everybody's going to be talking about. But I do think the IMC has done an amazing, what they pulled off, to Carson, to your point about the timing. I mean, I sat how they played this out and exactly how they mapped it out. Thankfully, they had capital behind them. But how they played this out, the odds were super low. Everything played together. Going even back to your point about small businesses, my good friend, I think you guys know Gayla Huber. She works very closely with the Small Business Association. She was on my panel at Lead Generation World. She was the one that actually got the ruling switch 6 months delayed. So this was supposed to go into effect in June
August
or July
yeah.
of 24.
Yeah.
And so she got it delayed to January of 25. Because of your point, the administration change, if you remember, right after the election, Ted Cruz sent out a letter saying to all the regulatory, agencies that he said, put your pens down. Any rule that has not been put into effect yet, put your pens down. The problem was our rule was already signed off on. The one-to-one was signed off on. So now we're in this middle ground area like, hey, the new administration is going to come in. They're going to appoint a new FCC chair, and basically also what that means is one of the Democrats will step down and there'll be a new appointee and there'll be 3-2 Republican majority. The also challenge of that is the new appointed chair, Brendan Carr, he voted against the one-to-one, he voted for it initially. So I think to your point, your guys' point, they didn't know the full ramifications for small businesses. They didn't see the overreach initially. They just said, hey, we want to stop unavoidable calls or robocall. Like I hate, and I know you guys probably too, is like we get labeled into some category of robocall. Like we don't robocall.
Well, and
it's like
when it first came out, and a lot of people forget this, TCPA was originally created because the robocall was just straight up an IVR dialer that made up phone numbers. Like you look at the actual language of the TCPA, it talks about auto-generated phone numbers. No one in our industry does that. No one makes up a phone number. You get a lead from somewhere, there's an opt-in. You didn't have the dialer make it up and just call people. That's what it was really intended for, was to stop that practice. And somehow it's kind of morphed into hitting our industry as well. And I like that there are these trade organizations. It is hard, like you said earlier, to have uniformity in terms of practice. There's so many different thoughts. There's different opinions. I do like where Reach is at. When I first met Eric Troutman, he was wearing a top hat, and I thought he was a magician. But I'll give this guy the credit that he absolutely is thinking of the long term for our industry, identifying things that even with this current administration, and let's say everything pushes out 4 years, even then, there's going to be more people coming around, and they're going to look at this and say, people don't want unwanted calls. Like, how are you going to fix this? How are you going to make a better experience for the consumer? The Reach guys are pretty good about that, and I'm glad there's the other people around to make that kind of push those changes for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, go ahead, Joey. I was just going to say, like one of the things that was frustrating after that announcement was the collective excitement about that being rolled back by certain people, because I'm like, okay, that means that they're just going to go full hog with
back to
bad practices and stuff like that. And I think Troutman was the one that said everything that was illegal on Friday is still going to be illegal on Monday. You know, is what they said, and it's so true. Yep. You got to still have to follow the regulations that are already in place, and doesn't mean it's Wild West or anything like that. So
exactly, we all already current operate under the TCPA as it stands today, right? Like we know our because of the mobile provision, that the time that you're speaking about too, about the random sequential number generation, it is also when they added the mobile provision, right? Which is where you have to have clear express consent to call somebody. That's not going away. And right now that's defined in our industry as by putting that language by the submit button that says, by clicking here, you're authorizing ABC contact. But it's a link out to this marketing partners list. That's kind of where we got to this over bombing of calls, and cross sells. And so I do think, like you said, the brands will kind of have much better understanding of that. They're not going to turn a blind eye to it. They're going to want the lead generators to do some reform, and it's a better consumer experience. That's what you talk about. Like just better. We as a lead generation performance marketing community the last 10 years or so have probably thought more about consumers as zeros and ones. It's monetization. Publicly traded companies in our space, the pressure of hitting your numbers, the selling data files, these things it's not a good thing. And I think we have to look back and say, hey, if my mom was going through a Medicare application, how would you want her to feel and be treated, right? Like,
Yeah.
personalize this experience as a consumer going through this journey and really thinking how we can treat consumers better. And that wins, business. Our society goes on extremes, right? And we have to find more commonality, especially in this fashion. Now,
100%.
thankfully, the rule was overreached. It cramped down on legitimate, and like you said, small businesses could not compete. They really could. And now, because if you're going through that flow and you had to pick brands that you knew or associated with, you weren't going to pick one that you hadn't heard of as a consumer. That's just not how consumers act, right? So I think we're all going to learn and evolve through this. And at least we know that we can play on the current TCPA rules compliantly and advise our clients around that.
Yeah, for sure. The only thing I have with the TCPA is if there was a change I would encourage is the frivolous lawsuits. Somehow addressing that. It is too much to we're at this point where you can go and you can get a trusted form video recording of somebody opting in and have their IP address, and they just go, that's not my IP. You can later prove that it's probably their IP, but you've spent $30,000 in legal fees to get to that point. It would be nice if they could adjust and say, like, hey, not every dial is worth $1 billion. Because next thing you know, it's just, especially if you look at the function versus the cost of violation, it's not proportional. It's not correct. So it would be nice if they could address that.
You're spot on. The private right of action is out of hand, right? There's professional TCPA litigators. And actually, take a step back for a second. When I did my webinar last week, which was something that really hit home to me when I was at Lead Generation World, was something that most people weren't even talking about this role, job loss. I was really fearful that we were underestimating how many jobs could be lost if this went into effect. And it wouldn't be like immediate job losses because like today, I'm talking over the next year, because you have to see the effect, right, of how the media and how the output of leads and the true effect of the flow through with the check boxes, and really what that did. That meant that there would be a lot of lead generators would have to skinny back their staffing. A lot of the lead generators that have call centers that are dependent on that call center warm transfer, right? They'd have to skinny that back. The buyers that had their sales agents dependent on this channel would also probably have to pull back. We'd see this could be thousands of jobs,
for sure,
tens of thousands. And then to your point, these other people are going to benefit off this new rule. These TCPA litigators, they're actually going to benefit while good, hardworking Americans are losing their jobs. We're paying these guys that are about to have more leg up on private right of action and hold legitimate businesses hostage for settlements. It was just so lopsided. It was so frustrating, infuriating. And so I'm glad you brought that up. I don't know if now we can go on the offensive and say, hey, now we're on the other side of this. Let's actually strike up, revising this down to private right of action has a cap or something. I don't know, but it's hard. It's hard because of damages these folks try to prove out. But I'm obviously not an attorney, but it is frustrating, Nate.
Yeah,
very frustrating.
You're absolutely right, and that was one of the concerns. The client that we were working with on Friday, that was literally their words. They were like, we need to know that we can comply with this. But we're also very, very concerned about our volume on Monday, that our volume's going to drop significantly. We're going to be cutting back headcount. We're going to, some of their loan officers and things like that would be losing their jobs and having to find other work. And where are they going to go if everybody else is experiencing that same thing? And that would have had a ripple effect through the market and through the economy. At a time when we really don't need that right now, right?
Yeah, for sure. In fact, I think I saw it even at the professional level, executive level within the lead generation space. I saw friends that are really capable people, and they lost their jobs. And there were other kind of management level, director level people who lost their jobs too. I think, Joey, we saw some of that. I know you saw some of that, and you're trying to help some of these people find good positions. There's some really smart, experienced, talented people who lost their jobs that were it was 100% in anticipation of the one-to-one consent. So hopefully now things will build momentum so they can get some more positions out there. But yeah,
that's a good.
I agree. I think we'll get some clarity here in the next couple days, weeks, and months ahead, where job creation comes back, right? Because like there was a big lead generator that I'm working with that put a hiring freeze in place. They didn't want to hire any more people. They wanted to make sure that they had the right staffing and how they interpreted the rule and how their business was going to carry forward. They didn't want to add any more headcount. And probably a lot, like you said, a lot of folks that were like that. And you could see in LinkedIn through the holidays, it was more sad than positive, right? In regards to fearful of this impact on jobs and businesses and the economy. And I'm excited that we're to the other side of it. And I think that we will see companies start opening back up roles around all lead gen for the days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, this is a perfect segue into what you're working on now, Joey. You've got Liner Connections. That's your new sort of main focus that you're working on. I know you've done a lot of consulting in the industry. You know, certainly every company and brand that's out there that's in the space buying and generating leads and traffic. And you have a lot of relationships that you've built over the years with people who have, added a considerable amount of value to these companies and groups. And there's connections that can be made there with people and with opportunities. Tell us a little bit about the Liner Connections that you're working on now, Joey.
Yeah, no, I started the business basically to carry my experience that I've worked with for 20 some years within performance marketing and be able to help as many different products, verticals, just different categories that I felt were interesting to me, but work with people that I care about, like you. There's one thing to say as far as like, just I'm very fortunate and grateful that I have a great trust within the community, that I've earned, because I really value interacting with different people every day. And that's what Liner Connections is. It's really connecting buyers, sellers, and service providers and making that magic happen. Because there's, whether it's specific to a vertical like insurance or home services or consumer finance, education, or whether it's product specific like calls, digital traffic, leads, I'm a part of all of it. And thankfully, because of my evolution in my career, I was also in the call center space like you guys. I was at Double Positive. In the 2000s, we did a lot of contact center work. It was managed services, working with all those categories that I just mentioned. So I built up a lot of trust. You guys do it as well. You're a strategic arm to the brands that you're working with. So you have to get intimate with them, right? You have to get a better sense of what their sales processes are and how you're really impacting their performance. And it's gratifying when you win, right? Everybody wins. And when I took the job at DMS as CRO, it just blew up my whole evolution of career, from going from managed services to this mega lead generator, right? This big media company that had an affiliate network. It had all these different vertical businesses already established. It had call center business. It was just lead side. I mean, it was just so big. And my head was on a swivel trying to manage and service all these different product lines and categories. And it taught me so much. And so I went out and said, hey, let me go out and do this as Liner Connections. And it's been really cool working with all the people that I care about and helping them, like I said, making the magic happen. And then I backed into recruiting this year because it was really the same thing. It's like, hey, can you help me find the head of sales? Or, hey, can you help me find a head of insurance? So it's kind of like I backed into that. And it was really cool when you make a match and you see those people go work together and create $1 million in revenue together. It's like, man, that's pretty freaking cool.
Yeah, it is cool. That's awesome to hear. We're glad that you're part of our ecosystem too, Joey, and we consider ourselves friends of Liner Connections and all the good that comes from it for us as well.
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of you guys. I know I always say, especially in today's world, it's so hard to run a domestic US-based call center program, right? Just because it's just the reality of a lot of situations Americans are in, the wage line, the the ability to be able to keep morale up, the training, the career path, promotions. Like you guys, you hit the nail on the head on covering that. And it's just great to work with you because you do execute really, really well. And I think all your clients benefit from that. It's great to see that. And I hope you're going to get rewarded for all the hard work you've put in diversifying into other categories. Now we all know the mortgage industry and consumer finance is going to have a big growth spurt in 2025.
Yeah, let's hope so. That's our plan. That's what we're hoping for sure.
Yeah.
That's what we're seeing. We're seeing some momentum there, some
Yeah.
enthusiasm for sure.
Yeah,
Well,
I think auto insurance probably will be the biggest vertical just because it has the widest audience, right? Like it caters to almost everybody. And, it suffered, from 2021 halfway through 21 all the way to really halfway through last year. And then Progressive started coming back in. They're kind of like, they carry the market. They started aggressively coming out buying clicks, and a lot of the carriers and agencies started following. And there's very good confidence if you're at Lead Generation, where you guys know everybody's talking about auto insurance, right?
Yep.
And I think consumer finance and home services are also positioned to grow big time, given consumers still need to deal with if they have credit card debt, or if they may want to refinance, they may have to tap into the equity of their home. There could be personal loans, just all different paths and how they can actually help get money and help fuel the economy, which is what we all want. Yeah. And also home services, putting more into their homes, right? If people are really staying put in their homes, which we all see too, some people don't want to touch their first mortgage and they're going to put more into their home. So I think it's roofing, flooring, windows. Those are all big categories that, can continue to grow. So it's exciting time to be in performance marketing, because usually it's one category, as you guys know, that is the confidence that's going to grow. And I think there's pretty good sentiment out there now, especially with the change of administration and some of the moves that have already been made, that there's going to be tailwinds in a lot of these different categories. So it's really cool to get the one-to-one news on top of that, because now we can all focus just on strategic growth. And I think we'll be talking about that for days and weeks ahead.
Yeah, totally agree.
Home services is set to explode for sure.
Yeah, we've seen a lot of home service bubble up and doing really well with it. So that's been a fun one. And of course, all the other verticals too have been pretty steady.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, Joey, about shifting gears into like football. We talked about football before we got off, and I know that we both suffered a loss as a Lions fan and as a Ravens fan. You're the biggest Ravens fan I know, and tell me a little bit about what you think for this next year. Where are the Ravens headed in 25-26?
I don't know. It's an emotional thing.
I do think the Lions, probably, just putting this out there first, I think they definitely were the best team in 2024 season. I do think that it's sad to see that, just the reality of the playoff game that they didn't win, but my Ravens have had amazing teams since 2019. But you turn the ball over 3 times in a playoff game, you're not going to win. And that's a pattern they've had since the playoff. And I love this guy right behind me, Lamar Jackson. He's by far, changed our franchise, and it's so much fun to watch and just get behind a guy like that. And I really feel like he can do it. The window of opportunity you just can't take for granted in the NFL because of the parity. And it's different. Like, there's big confidence now in baseball that the Dodgers could just own baseball for the next decade, because they just keep stacking up stud after stud after stud. In football, you feel pretty good about the parity, or at least the chance for every season resetting. You can't take for granted when you get to the postseason. And I just feel like we have the team that can do it again next year. I'd love to be there. I'm sure you would as well. And I think they will. I think at some point, and this sounds like a broken record, the Chiefs can't just keep winning.
I think the league catches up with them. I do think, I thought it would have been this year, but I think between Buffalo and Baltimore, I think they catch them next year. And I think the seeding is not going to be in their favor. I think it finally catches up. But that's a long time to take to catch up to them in general.
It hurts. You have to watch the draft and all this preparation, free agency. But you're right. I think a lot of folks – but look, KC earned that 1 seed, right? And that's the matchup they got against the Texans, who are probably, an easy – for sure. They had home field advantage and easier path. That Bills-Ravens game was sadly one of those teams who's going to have to lose. And I was going back and forth with a lot of my Bills friends. I mean, some people thought that could have really been the FC Championship. To your point, it's just a matter of seedings, but the Chiefs earned it. So who knows what next year will happen, but I do think the 4 best quarterbacks in the NFL are in the NFC. And that's just the reality. I mean, and that's not knocking Jared Goff, Carson. It's just the reality is I don't put him in the top 4 or 5. But he's pretty darn good.
He's got good weapons.
I just think that, amazing weapons.
Yeah, that was like sort of, I don't know what that would have looked like if the Lions, they had so many injuries and Aiden Hutchinson was on the sidelines the whole, for majority of the season. I don't know if we had gone all the way, it still would have felt a little bit, disappointing not having him out there on the field playing and everything like that. So, maybe for that reason we can have another shot at it next year. But, I had to rebuild the coaching staff now. Like you talk about the parity and all that stuff. That makes a huge difference. New offensive coordinator, new defensive coordinator, plus all of their assistants and everything like that. It's going to be like a whole new leadership group. And where do you go from there? Still have a lot of the great role players and weapons like, Jamar Gibbs and hopefully they can get all the receivers back and everything like that. But anyway, it's fun. It's fun watching them go through it and get to that point. And everyone wants to go all the way, but they're going to only be one champion. So
that's it. It's one Super Bowl champ, and Chiefs, have a chance to set a record doing it 3 years in a row. And you're just like, man, but because they, it's crazy. You got wiped out. Your 2 coordinators are gone, right? Which is usually one coordinator goes in the situation where a team like the Lions are set. But I think both those guys had so much talent and respect that they were bound to be sniped. But somehow KC is so good at keeping – well, Andy Reid's not going anywhere, right? He's the best modern-day play caller in the NFL. He can scheme and plan for a game better than anybody. He's got the best floor general in Mahomes. And somehow Steve Spagnuolo hasn't taken a head coaching job the last 3 or 4 years, right? Because that guy sees the same thing. He's a best schemer on making in-game adjustments, which is what Bill Belichick was so good at for so long, is just – the coaches that can make those in-game adjustments are going to thrive. And, until that formula is broke, I don't think those guys – they're always going to be there.
Well, I remember when the Chiefs were already pretty good, and then they picked up Spags. And as soon as they did that, I remember him from his previous jobs. Like he's always been a beast, right? Like that's not new just to this organization, not to the Chiefs. So – like when they picked him up, I was like, "Oh man, this is going to be a big deal. It's going to matter a lot," and it certainly's paid off.
It's huge.
How in the world does the NFL allow the coach recruiting going on during the playoffs? Like the Lions assistants were all having discussions by all the teams were like, "Hey, we want to meet with you about our head coaching opportunity for next year." They're staring down the next game, but they also know that they're looking at potentially like $4 or $5 million next year. I don't know, maybe more. Whatever those contracts are, I'm not even familiar with, but they know how much money they're going to be getting next year, the new role they're going to get, the new team, facilities, all that kind of stuff. But yet they're supposed to go win the next game. And that's all they should be thinking about. And I think it really is frustrating the NFL allows that.
Well, the off season's long enough that you should be able to push till it's done, right? You just say no recruiting of any coach until after the Super Bowl. Then go at it, go nuts, right? But you'd think they'd let them do that.
It's hard because you're talking to a Jaguars team who's won like 2 games saying, "Oh, you guys have to wait till we all."
Well, win then, But yeah,
I agree because, the point that you brought up, Carson, like some of the talk shows will bring that up like on Monday or Tuesday. Of those weeks, right, where your guys were getting interviewed. Same thing, Ravens, Tom Lincoln, by the time you get to game time, you almost forget about that stuff. It's like, but when you look back now, it's like it probably had an impact on Aaron Glenn and Ben Johnson and Todd Monken's planning. They lost, right? So
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's the only reason, but you're right. Like those guys are spending time on Zoom, preparing for interviews. You know, I know that they're not traveling on location, but it's like, yeah, you got to be locked in on, you know, you hear all these stories on coaches. They're literally in the building 24 hours preparing for the game, you know, and some of them sleep in the building. Like it's so, yeah, it deterred it put them away from, and who can blame them? Like you said, they're about to get paid. It's frustrating. And maybe there is some way through that. I don't know, but it's hard when you're the Jaguars or, you know, all the franchises who fired their coach 5 weeks ago and are like, we got to do something
They
to
can
get
wait.
our fans rallied up.
They're not doing anything for 6 weeks. They
Yeah,
can wait.
well, if you're one of those franchises, you stink anyway, and your friends don't want to even talk to you. So just hang
How
out,
about
go
the Cowboys?
to
What the
a
hell's
beach
going on there?
somewhere.
I mean, that's a whole nother podcast.
Oh man.
Well, gentlemen, we've talked for a long time, and it's been awesome. And Joey, we're so grateful you could be here. But it's probably time to wrap it up, even if we don't want to. It's getting late in the day. So thanks again, Joey, for being here. You've been watching the Juice Consumer Direct podcast with Nate Clay, Carson Poppenger, and Joey Liner.
Make sure you like and subscribe, and put down comments and questions that you've got in the threads.